Hey there, welcome back. Today I have a story courtesy to this traveler here, who recommended I check this one out next. This is a story of vicious reapers taking the souls of those who no longer have time left. Before I get into the story though, please go check it out for yourself, as this game is generally on sale for cheap on either Epic or Steam. Even when it's not on sale, I would consider this one worth it at full price. With that out of the way, let's get into the tale of a forsaken crow's journey to reap what was taken from him. Upon starting the game, we're shown a sort of black and white world, which is revealed to be the Reaping Commission headquarters. We're shown how to move, and after walking a bit, we're given our first soul reaping assignment, which is to take the soul of a giant. After giving us our assignment though, we're also given an ominous warning that when a crow's on an assignment, they age and are mortal, meaning they're at extreme risk. No worries about that though, let's go see that silly giant and show them which bird is the word. A side note here, but this is effectively the hub world for the game, where we can upgrade ourselves via souls and travel through doors as fast travel across regions. After passing through our very first door, we enter the Grove of Spirits and have more tutorial stuff showing us how to hit, shoot, and dodge, as well as some other basic stuff like hitting buttons does things. At the end of the tutorial though, we get our first boss of the game, the Demonic Forest Spirit. This boss is somewhat similar to Vinthesis from a previous game the devs made called Titan Souls, which I actually already made a video on that you should go check out. There are lots of tendril attacks as well as some bomb-like attacks too, but as this was a tutorial boss, I didn't really have any issues and beat it first try. After beating the boss though, we're knocked out before grabbing its soul. After waking up, we decide to pursue the thief so that we could continue our reaping in peace. We enter another door which leads to the sub-hub of the game, the Lost Cemetery. While moving through the area, we can see the thief much more clearly and can 100% see that he's an extremely old crow. He's been in the field for a while, but why? In order to find out, we make haste. We find a life seed on the way, which when planted in pots found around the map, creates a permanent healing point, which fully restores the crow's health regardless of how low we are. We also find a bundle of souls, which is nice for upgrades, as well as the fast travel door that leads to the Lost Cemetery. We'll be using this a lot in the future, but for now I explore for a bit before finding a key which leads to a sort of round-based enemy room. I'll also mention here that the enemies aren't too hard or too easy, and I quite like what the developers came up with here. Eventually we find Stedhone, the Gravekeeper. He shows us a couple different ways we can attack by asking us to kill him, but we can't even hurt the guy. He says we can always come back and try next time, so for now we keep pursuing our soul thief, who is most likely at the summit of the cemetery. My bad. For sake of time here, I'm not going to tell you every time I find a seed, but remember that we need these for the future. Continuing on the path, I find the first shrine in the game, which works exactly like how permanent buffs in God of War do, meaning I need 4 green shrines and 4 red shrines for a health buff and a magic buff, respectively. After finding the shrine, I do find another thing that I want to make note of here to remember, which is a door that reminds me of the doors from Titan Souls. I wonder what this could be here for. With that tucked into the back of our heads, we fight our first wizard enemy during another round-based enemy room before finally upgrading our DPS and reaching the boss of the last cemetery, the Guardian of the Door. Yes, I had the same thought you did. That's literally an entire cathedral that I have to fight. This boss has some simple mechanics of slamming its arms around and spinning to damage us, with the hardest part being when the boss decides to start spamming lasers and missiles. One detail that I'd like to point out is that when bosses are damaged, red cracks are shown on their body in proportion to their health, with more cracks appearing with the less health they have. Unfortunately, this is where I have my first death, but that's okay because shortly after I beat the boss and finally confront the thief on the summit. A cutscene starts with who we now know as the Grey Crow feeding our target into a door. Obviously, we want to get the soul back, but the Grey Crow tells us that a long time ago his assignment also escaped into the door, and this whole time he's been stuck trying to find a way to open it. He reveals that the door is actually called Death's Door, title drop roll credits, and essentially everything goes into Death's Door eventually in, well, death. Only problem is, in order for us to not be mortal and age like he has, we need to get the door open, which involves taking down 3 other giant souls. In the north, there's a witch who's obsessed with immortality, to the east a king that rules over some ruins of a cathedral, and to the west a beast lurks awaiting its next prey. He recommends that we go get the witch to the north first, so that's what we do. On the way, we find a locked up tower, which I have to once again tell you, keep that as a little footnote, because that locked tower is super important later. We venture through some crypt-like area before riding an elevator down into the entrance of the next area, the estate of the Urn Witch. So the first thing we realize in the estate is that arrows can be used to spread fire to separate containers for puzzles. We grab another fast travel door and end up meeting our best and most awesome companion, Pothead. He joins our adventure, but instead of helping us, he decides to wait for us to clear every obstacle for him. You are so lucky that your pod is charming, buddy. It becomes clear why she's called the Urn Witch, as there are self-repairing urns and explosive urns quite literally everywhere. Something that you might catch as well is that most of the enemies in any area to do with the witch actually have urns on their heads for a reason we'll get into later. In this area, we really just fight some different enemy groups in order to open a gate that will lead us further into this state. Once the gate is open, Pothead decides it's time for a rest and chat. He tells us that he's been cursed to have a pot for for a head and obviously doesn't want to stay that way, so he wants to ask the witch if she can fix it. He asks us if we want any of his head soup before we quickly say no and get on with our adventure. We have both a left and right path to choose from in order to open another gate, so I decide to go right. And I'm so glad I did, because I got to meet my one and only true love, Thick Knight. Unfortunately, Thick Knight didn't like me as much as I liked them, so let's just say we didn't work out. As a reward for choosing the right side, I find some daggers, which I actually end up using for most of my playthrough. I'll talk more on weapon choices later, but just know that there are 5 of them. Of course, I'll be letting you know every time I find a weapon and if I used it or not. For now though, I went to the left side and entered the Garden of Love, where a puzzle I didn't understand sat. Now I'm gonna be honest, I just can't lie to you guys. I couldn't stop the completionist inside of me and looked up the solution because I thought I was just being stupid. Turns out I actually needed a collectible from later on to do this, but let's just say I got in a bit early. For now, this area really has no use to me, but in post-game, this will become my most hated area. I'm so sorry, past me, you didn't know what was to come. After finishing through the left side, we finally entered the Ceramic Manor. Once inside, I unlock another fast travel spot and upgrade my damage again before continuing on inside the manor. Lots of pot-themed enemies await me in the manor alongside 4 crow spirits that I have to rescue. Now, in every boss's area in the game, there are 4 crow spirits that must be found and saved in order to unlock a new ability necessary to actually get to fight the boss. Each spirit crow is hidden by various enemies or puzzles or a combination of both. For the sake of time, I won't explain every single room here, but I will mention some notable ones. In one of the rooms to the right, I find a gold key which is necessary to continue, and the first spirit crow I found was in this right side of the map where I had to fight an Alice in Wonderland-esque heart enemy to reach the spirit. This thing was weird, but it wouldn't be the last time I'd have to fight him. After reaching crow number 1, it tells us that we've been abandoned here, and that they didn't think anyone was going to come open the door. Interesting food for thought, but for now we need to find crow number 2. As we leave the room though, the witch finally greets us, asking if the deal is off. While we don't know what that means now, it's definitely something to remember. For now, we can't do much, so I slap her and continue on my way. On the left side of the manor, there's a locked door that I use the golden key on, which in turn leads me to another key. I grab that, quickly die and have to run back, and unlock a shortcut before fighting a large dancing pot. It had moves, but unfortunately my sword doesn't like to tango. After a couple more rooms, we finally reach spirit number 2, which asks us why the door closed and how they could make it back. There seems to be some larger plot that went on in the past, but it seems we'll have a lot more to uncover. The witch meets us again, and I guess this is just our little thing now, and threateningly tells us that she wasn't expecting guests. She also mentions shattered pots, but I wouldn't know anything about that. Now it's time I head to the north side of the manor, where I once again grab another golden key, fight another heart golem, and rescue spirit number 3 that tells us she could make him immortal, but only with a pot for a head, so he passed. I got confused here for a bit, but I ended up figuring out that the last spirit was on the left side of the manor where I had traveled before. Here I fight another heart golem with some wizards backing them up, with spirit number 4 being my reward. It tells us that it's starting to question the authority of the Lord of Doors, but as it's dead, that might not really matter. The witch appears again and tells us that we're not welcomed here any longer and that her darn grandson has been led astray by us. Ouch, pothead, seems like you left some details out. She also tells us we shouldn't go into her basement, so as you'd expect, that's exactly where I want to go now. I actually think I could have finished her here as I spammed with my daggers and she got cracked before inevitably teleporting off. I wonder if it's possible to take her down in these rooms before actually having to fight her. That'd be pretty cool. Before going through the door that the crow spirits opened, I found a shrine by completing a reflection puzzle, of which I found very creative. I also decided to backtrack and found another shrine by walking into some bushes between hedges. I hate that I didn't find this earlier when I passed by, but hey, better late than never. After going back and traveling through the crow door, I find, wait, is that Avarice from Titan Souls? This is where I have to let you know another detail. After every single crow spirit is found in a boss area, we have to win against Avarice after he roars us.
Romantic? Shit, I'm so romantic, I'll walk in with it dangling.
Which includes a 4-stage boss where each stage is comprised of a wave of enemies. Luckily, I like the combat in this game and all Avarice sections comprised some of my favorite parts. After beating Avarice, we're awarded with the fire spell by some king crow spirit. Something I forgot to mention before is that every crow spirit door leads back to the Reaper Commission, so that's pretty cool. After using our fire abilities, we find an abandoned logbook, which essentially says that the crows were ordered to shut down the doors in the region, and that they don't know what happened to the crows left behind. It's also worth noting that it said crows were assisting the witch, probably trying to help her figure out some sort of method of immortality. Maybe that research led her to creating the potheads, who knows. From here, I did some backtracking and found another shrine in the estate before entering the witch's basement, the furnace observation rooms. In this area, there's some cool bull-flying minecart things that I can control by slapping, and when venturing further into the area, we can see Pothead's been trapped in some sort of green research container. I continue so that I can save him, grabbing a shrine before running into the witch standing next to to his container. She tells us that she warned us and yells to go away before teleporting with Pothead. After that lovely conversation, we venture into the next area, the inner furnace. This area is comprised of using the fire spell on furnaces to power pistons, which move in rhythm with the soundtrack. Dare I say, this is pretty cool. This area's enemies are comprised of mutated experiments and poison-lobbing plague doctors, which happen to be my least favorite kind. After making it through every room with a couple deaths here and there, it's time to fight the witch. But not before a little dialogue where 1, she is very mean, and 2, she finally tells us that death cannot see those who put their life force within urns. She also lets us know that we have the same employer, but that they can't find out what we've seen, so it's time for us to fight. Grandma, the Witch of Urns, is an interesting boss, as I don't feel like there were any super crazy mechanics here, but I still died anyways. She throws some explosive pots around and lobs tracking bullets around the map, which are really annoying, but not too bad. Eventually, she'll hop into the pot on her head and hop around a bit, as well as shoot tons of bullets across the entire map. Once she gets low enough, she'll start to spawn magic bullets in a circle around her as well, which got me killed the first time. After a try or two, I finally collect her soul and wake up to Stedhone having a funeral for her. He mentions her various aliases and recounts her life story of trying to defeat death. Pothead says that he supposes he'll always have a pot for a head, and he's just glad Grandma's with Grandpot. When trying to go back to the Reaper Commission though, we accidentally meet the Lord of Doors. He asks us why we're even there, but upon assuming we won an award, he gives us a metric ton of applause before sending us back to the commission. The camera lingers for a bit before showing that the Lord of Doors is actually watching Death's Door for some reason. Regardless of that though, we upgrade ourselves some more before heading back to the Grey Crow to find out which boss we should head to next. He informs us that it's time to head east, so that's what we do. We ride a gondola driven by this thing and end up at the overgrown ruins. Before we continue the video though, I wanted to ask that if you've enjoyed the video so far, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Any engagement helps and gives me more motivation to keep pushing these videos out. With that out of the way though, let's get back into the video. I walked around a little until I found this weird circular plant that lobbed explosives at me. I beat it up for way longer than I should have before eventually realizing that these plants were invincible and were more so used as a mechanic to blow up destructible walls, similarly to how the witch's explosive urns could. I ended up finding some seeds and then I came across the forest settlement. Here I was told by the forest mother that in order to proceed we need to get her magic horn from the northern part of the ruins. My journey was pretty smooth outside of getting ganked by multiple enemies and dying once. Eventually, I finally found her horn and brought it back, which allowed her to converse the forest and open a passageway into, well, ruins below the ruins, or as the game likes to call it, the Mushroom Dungeon. This is another boss area with spirit crows that we need to find. After entering one of the first rooms, we meet the king the Grey Crow mentioned earlier, the Frog King. He says he earned his power fairly and that we're gonna need some luck to take it. I don't think he realizes that I don't need luck as I have skill, so don't worry buddy, call me Gambit the way I'm about to be eating some Cajun frog legs.
You know how long I've been waiting for this?
The first crow I grab is on the right side of the dungeon, and I have to go through another couple waves of enemies as per usual. It says that it didn't want to end up dead in a dungeon, which, let's be real, that's one of the fairest things that's been said in this game so far. Afterwards, I grab a key and head to the southern part of the ruins to grab the next crow spirit. These waves introduce a tank-like enemy, but they aren't much of a problem when I'm playing careful. Unfortunately, this one took me 2 tries due to an embarrassing death, but hey, I got the spirit. It tells us that the Lord of Doors is losing the plot and wonders how they could let the doors malfunction. This is pretty much just more interesting lore stuff, but for now, on to the next. We head to the left and grab another key before heading further left and finding our next weapon, the Thunder Hammer. This weapon swings slower and has less swings in general, but it also seemed to have a cool lightning effect that stayed on enemies for a bit and could spread between them. I don't know if this really did any more damage in general with the lightning effect, but it looked cool and I liked it. Despite the weapon looking pretty cool though, it didn't really end up having much of a use and I ended up putting it up for the dagger shortly after getting it. For now, we go and unlock a new door and talk to the Frog King again, where he proclaims that he has helped the forest and the village of people we found earlier were simply hindering said helping of the forest. He says the world is a wasteland and he's simply adapting, which, you know what, that's fair man, I don't really have anything against a big frog, but I have a game to play and violence to commit. So after talking to him, I go into the next room where the next crow spirit awaits. This one was tougher for me, but eventually I got through and rescued the crow spirit. It just says there's nothing down here but filth and little frogs. Luckily for said little frogs, their daddy isn't long for this world. I travel a little further and grab yet another key before backtracking and unlocking a locked door to the southeast of the dungeon. This is where the last crow is, and upon rescuing the spirit, it tells me that they were completely trapped and had no way out of the land. After hearing that, it's time to go fight Avarice again, and this one introduced some fast as hell archers that really messed me up. It took me a couple tries, mostly due to poison lobbers and magic spam. His shit blows up like a noob! But hey, I never said this game would be easy. After winning, another giant crow king spirit thing gives us another magic spell, this one being the one I used the most during my playthrough, the bomb spell, or as I like to call it, Big Bang Attack.
No, please. It hurt.
This is the strongest spell, but also the most costly as it takes 2 magic points to cast. It can also damage me if I'm too close, so I had to be pretty careful when using it. I once again found a traveler's log which told us that due to a seismic event, all doors were sealed and all assignments were cancelled. The writer asks themselves what happened to the crows left behind. Luckily, I have the answer, and the answer is that they're dead. After this, I actually ended up finding another logbook, which the bomb spell was required to find, alongside a collectible that says someone was spying on the commission. This logbook read that upper management was going crazy due to the seismic event, and all records of the event and closure of the doors was to be erased from the commission's history. The writer says that they can't leave those crows behind and that they're going to try to bring them back. The last thing written is that they'll update when they get back, but unfortunately, that's where this logbook ends. After that sad tale, I decided to go upgrade myself before continuing the main quest of eliminating the king frog in the next area, the flooded fortress. Before entering the area though, we have one last interaction with the king frog where he essentially tells us that he wants to cook and eat us. Also, apparently their chef makes a fantastic trifle. After entering the area, I find a shrine pretty quickly before finding the king's fortress, where I have a conversation with the guard until we're rudely interrupted by King Frog himself showing up and giving that guard a slice of his cake. He asks us if we like his new armor and then tells us that only the strong survive before hopping away. I grab another fast travel point and now it's time to fight through the fortress and get to the king. During the onslaught, I encounter boomerang-headed enemies. These guys were always annoying because they chuck their weapon at you and also jump around, so by themselves not too bad, but in an area with other enemies, my gosh. Outside of tons of enemy waves, there isn't too much to talk about here, but I will say I thought this area was going to be annoying at first, but it was actually really fun to brandish some combat skills. After I made it through the fortress, it was time to confront the king of the swamp, guardian of the flooded fortress, lord of his domain, ruler of all his surveys, champion of the people, keeper of the 5 oaths. Okay, you get the point. Honestly, this isn't even half of his titles. You can read them all on screen if you want. It's just way too much for a lowly peasant such as myself to convey to you. This fight has a really fun game mechanic. The king has a switch on his main weapon that can repair the stage that we're fighting on. Most of his attacks completely destroy tiles on the stage, but in his first phase he automatically repairs them himself. This first phase is pretty easy and more of a tutorial on the main boss mechanic. The second phase happens when he randomly decides to just become an actual monster. This phase destroys way more tiles than the last one due to 1, the vor attack, and 2, lobbing attacks. In order to keep the map in one piece, you have to shoot his weapon that rests on his back. After grabbing his soul, we once again are shown a funeral for the boss we just took care of. Stedhone really just says that he was a ruler and was persecuted for his desire for strength. It was now that I decided to backtrack again, and for 1, I ended up releasing a prisoner in the underground ruins, and 2, I ended up actually finding a secret boss. I was exploring around the cemetery when I found some rocks blocking a passage. After entering through a white door with a bomb on top, I had to fight against a silent servant. There are 4 of these in the game, and each give a permanent power up to whatever skill they're associated with, this one being associated with bombs. After beating him, I upgraded my bombs to only damage enemies, meaning I don't have to be worried about self-detonation. With my new upgrade in hand, I went to talk to the Grey Crow again, where he congratulated me and told me to head to the final boss, the Beast in the West. While making my way towards the Beast, I happened to find another shrine, and eventually I came across our old friend Pothead in a village area called the Stranded Sailor. Pothead lets us know he's responsible for the pots we can find around the map to plant our heals in, and that it's his dream to have them all filled. I sure hope this won't become a problem later. We also meet a couple of colorful individuals here, such as an individual who has had way too many telling us he won't find love again after Betty. Here we also find the prisoner that we helped escape from the dungeon, where he gives us his mask. Inside of the shop nearby, we can talk to Jefferson. There's something off about him that I just can't put my finger on. Plug's a little weird, but he's chill. He asks us if we want a meal, of which we graciously accept. Jefferson is pretty cool because he lets us know areas where treasure is supposed to be during our meals. This was a reasonably useful mechanic, and I enjoyed 1 or 2 other meals during my playthrough to help me find things. Outside, we can meet Barb, the bard, who is actually in the forest village. She wants to write a new song with the Beast as her main inspiration, so I guess that means we have a new companion. Unfortunately, that's all the time I get to spend relaxing in a village, and it's time to head into the next area, Castle Lockstone. This is, once again, a boss area, meaning it's time to find our final 4 crows. After searching for a bit, I figured out at least one way to travel to the left, which led me to solving a laser puzzle where I couldn't get hit, and another couple waves of enemies that I had to fight before reaching crow number 1. It's also worth mentioning that a new big night variant is here, but they aren't too much of a threat judging as I have literal bombs. The first crow says that it's very cold, based and red-pilled, I guess. Next, I went northward and had to solve yet another laser puzzle so that I could grab a key. To the east of the area, I finally found a ladder, which led me to yet another couple waves of enemies and another crow spirit. The spirit said that even though it should be an honor being entombed next to the older generations of the Lords of Doors, it calls the situation it's in a tragedy. Afterwards, I traveled to an area where I light one of 4 necessary fires to continue into the next area. Each of these fires is beside an old Lord of the Doors, and after lighting each fire, I get to talk to a a generational lord. At this first fire, I talked to Lord Lockstone. He's the one the castle's named after, and he calls the Lords of Doors a mistake of the universe, but counters himself by also commenting that all life can be considered a mistake as well. His final lines say that preserving life is the most noble goal. After our conversation, I drop down into a previously locked area via the key I found earlier and fight some more waves before rescuing spirit number 3. It says that even after hearing lots about old Lords of Doors, he doesn't really like them at all. Now I just need to find the last spirit, but I got really confused. I had to look around for way longer than I'd like to admit before finding a passageway kind of hidden to the right of one of these rooms. This led to a switch which opened the right side of the map. This time, instead of one laser puzzle, there were multiple that I had to run through, and yet again after there were enemy waves to fight through. Once I rescued the last spirit, it said that it's not fair that the Lord plans to live forever even though it's dying. It's worth mentioning here that the Lord is singular, meaning that only one Lord is being referenced here. I'm sure we'll figure all of that out later though, and for now it's time to fight Avarice once again. At this point I just gotta wonder if my crow tastes good because way too many chests have been taking a sample recently. This is the final Avarice fight, but despite that, honestly this was a really easy 4 waves to get through. At the end I was awarded the final spell of the game, the hookshot spell. Now I can go everywhere and anywhere, so some backtracking will be due soon. For now I find another logbook, which tells us that the removing of the doors has really hurt ongoing investigations into the missing crows that were left behind. The more worrying part was that the reaping missions in the area were purged as well, and it says that everyone knows what happens to souls if they remain alive past their death date. Ominous, but yet again we'll probably find more about that soon as we're in the final stretch of the game. I also go exploring in the last area of the commission and find the final logbook, which says that whoever is writing is quitting their job after reading the other logbooks. They say that they're taking several of the crows who agree with them to the Forbidden region so that they can live a life without the commission. I wonder how they're doing. Now all that's left is to light the final 3 fires and talk to the final Lords of the Doors. I struggled to find all of these guys due to my poor exploration skills, so I'll skip all the wandering around and get to the point. In a room past where I flipped a switch earlier, I talked to the spirit of Lord Deadbolt, who tells us that balancing the universe is a hard duty. Who could have figured that out? He says that the Lord that created him thought of fate and purpose, but he never believed in fate, only duty. He tells us that he lived past the boundaries set by death as long as possible, and tells us that despite trying to teach his successor, they didn't care, and that their reign may have destroyed the balance he spent his life creating. Next, I talk to the spirit of Lord Opengate. He tells us that us being here might be indicative that the course of events that created Death's Door may be correcting themselves, and it's up to life to maintain balance. He leaves us by saying he sees victory in our future. The final spirit I talked to was Lord Theodore, who tells us that they never believed in the preservation of life and death. They also tell us that each Lord of Doors creates the next Lord before their death, and teaches them how to maintain balance. Despite their rule, they've tried their best to help the living, especially the hardworking crows. He leaves us by saying that he thinks destroying the system is best, and he hopes others will reach that conclusion. Anyways, now that all the fires are lit, it's time to ride the elevator into the next area. This area initially doesn't have a name, as it's revealed by meeting a crow named Vaga. This area is the Camp of the Free Crows, and is comprised of those who left the commission to live their lives to the fullest as opposed to being slaves to the system. Despite, no longer being immortal, they seem to be pretty happy with their decision. They tell us that they knew we were coming via the use of the Gate of Knowledge, which seems to know everything about everything. Remember this for later because it's really important to all the lore. Here I grab another key before heading onto an icy path to the left, which leads us to another shrine. Speaking of shrines, it's time to backtrack and find as many things I left behind as possible. I find another shrine before reading a puzzle that's required to pick up the next weapon, the Greatsword. It says to look under a wooden walkway, but during my confusion I ended up finding the hookshot Silent Servant. This one was way easier than the bomb one, and I quickly dispatched him for a hookshot upgrade, which gave me a nice optional slice when I grappled into enemies. After that fight, it was time to search for the secret under a walkway. Eventually I found it by sending a bomb hurling towards a wall underneath one of the higher stairways. And here I flipped a switch and read the hint for the next one, which was behind twin columns a secret awaits. Luckily, finding this one was easy, which led me to the next hint. The next one read where a giant faced stairs, and honestly I didn't really need more than that, as there was a huge giant statue facing a wall outside of this hint. The last hint read, beneath a gargoyle a secret awaits. This one was harder for me to find, but by walking into an area where the camera swaps, I ended up finding it. The final sign says that they exist to serve those who oppose the Lord of Doors. After all of that exploring, I finally got my greatsword, which I happily used until the end of the game. I continued backtracking here and eventually found the Silent Servant of Fire, which was located in an area around the cemetery. This one was definitely the hardest for me, as he spammed fireballs all around himself depending on how much damage he had taken. He also liked to lob bombs at me enemy, which is always fun. After beating him, the least obvious upgrade to my fire magic enabled burn damage to enemies hit by it. It was at this point that I decided that I would find every single shrine in the game to fully upgrade myself. There are only 16 shrines in the game, and by this point I had already found most of them, so the rest weren't too bad to find and just required me to either look into areas I already explored but accidentally missed a shrine in, or to do an extra puzzle or two. For sake of time, I'm not going to spell out everything I had to do here, but just know it was a slight pain to find all of this. Eventually, it would be nothing compared for what was to come, but yeah, you'll see when we get there. After grabbing every shrine, I ventured into the next area, the old watchtowers. This area felt really similar to the flooded fortress, as it's essentially just a really big combat trial that we need to get to the final giant. Most of what happened here was combat, with the flipping of switches occasionally happening to open shortcuts. After making it through the final waves of enemies, it was officially time to confront the final beast, Betty. Betty's a somewhat difficult fight, which reminded me of the Yeti from Titan Souls, funnily enough. Here she loves to jump up and down as well as roll into our direction, all of which can end up damaging us. She's essentially a highly mobile, constantly offensive boss. I could see her being extremely hard for passive players, but God knows I like it aggressive. I do have to admit that I didn't expect her to be so offensive, so I did actually die a couple times here, but despite that I ended up taking the W after said couple of tries. Once again, we have a funeral where Stedhone says that to some she was feared and to some she was worshipped, but most of all, some loved her as a beauty. Wait a minute, Betty? Oh my god, she's the Betty the drinking dude was wrecked over. Well, as I don't want to ponder about how that worked, it's time to head to the Grey Crow for the final time to finally get that darn door open. Oh yeah, also Barb finished her song, but it's mid. Boo! Once finally reaching the Grey Crow, it's finally time to open the door and grab our assignments. We both travel to the other side to see white everywhere. There is nothing here, certainly not life. Well, if life's not here, then why not death? No, literally, death is here. That's the literal Grim Reaper. He asks if we're here to rescue him, and we both are just kind of confused. He asks us how we got here, and we say we traveled through the door. He tells us that the souls that passed through the door are absorbed and recycled into new life. He also says that a long time ago he used to, well, reap souls until one day the very first Lord of Doors made a deal with death. The Lord would create doors to any place or world, and as such they could outsource death's power to a door in any world to take care of death's job. In return, all the Lord asked for was immortality, but since that's impossible, death extended their lifespans. Death explains that when someone lives for too long they become demonic, hence the cycle of life and death. He explains that for a long time lords would live their extra long lives and leave when it was their time until the current Lord of Doors didn't. He explains that the current Lord lured him into death's door and betrayed him by kicking him and sealing him within it. Afterwards he couldn't escape, and because of this there was essentially no death for the living. He's been here for centuries simply staring into nothing. Upon hearing this, Grey Crow is less than stellar upon connecting the dots that he can't possibly find his assigned soul, meaning there is no way to regain his immortality. He says that he refuses to die, and Death comments that he's a little past his due date, leading us into the Grey Crow boss fight. Also, Death is a bitch for leaving me like this. On top of everything, he has spells similar to our own, meaning he has a hookshot spell that allows him to commit drive-bys on us. After damaging him enough, he'll also spawn a swarm of what I assume are crows that continuously circle the player. I'm unsure if these damage you, I'm pretty sure they probably do, but I took no chances because by the point he pulled this out, I was one hit and I really didn't want to die. The final attack he has is essentially a black hole that hinders movements and sucks the player in. Don't ask me how, but I ended up beating this monstrosity first try despite only having 1 health for half the fight. Chalk it up to playing defensively, I guess. After beating the Grey Crow, he has no funeral, and I can only assume that his soul is absorbed into the ether where it will reincarnate and continue its cycle. Death says that he's sorry about our friend, but that our job isn't over. It's time to go kill the Lord of Doors and finally put the commission to rest. Upon traveling to the commission, all of our fellow crows rise up and accept that the Lord of Doors' reign should end, which will in turn permanently turn them mortal. They tell us that we're the chosen one and they'll leave it up to us to finish this once and for all. We walk through a newly appeared giant door to confront the final Lord of Doors. He relays what we've already come to know about each Lord of Doors, but he also adds that on the day that they're made, they're told the exact day that they'll die. He says that his predecessor was obsessed with rules and never gave him a name. He tells us that he couldn't live life fulfilling his duty knowing that his entire existence revolved around his death, so he had to save himself. He knows that he isn't in the right, but what would you do in a situation? Just let yourself die? He won't. And now it's time for both of us to fight for our lives. This boss fight is comprised of a couple different phases, with the first phase having 2 parts, a fighting part and a chasing part. In the fighting areas, he has some basic attacks but can also summon doors that charges bulls across the map. After damaging him enough, he'll enter the second part of phase 1, which is where he'll spawn a door and we have to chase him through it. Here there will be a chase sequence with a total of 4 chase sequences before phase 2. Each of these chases are comprised of quick parkour sections where he'll spawn bull doors of which we'll have to dodge to survive. Also, this might seem obvious, but we don't want to fall off into the void either. You'd think I wouldn't have to mention this, but Past Me decided that he wanted to fling himself into the avoid once or twice. After a chase sequence, the boss will slightly change as well, with him gaining the abilities to spawn pink lasers after some of his attacks, as well as a rolling move similar to Betty's after the second and third chases respectively. After the fourth chase, we're sent back to the commission where we find our crow companions have left, and all that waits for us is the Lord of Doors. He has some more dialogue where he ponders what the point of life is if we all die eventually. He says he'll never know, because he will never die. He absorbs the soul energy from the commission's vault, and thus begins our second phase against the last Lord. This phase has everything the previous phase did outside of chase sequences, but it's dialed up to 11. He also has some new attacks. Firstly, he gains the ability to spawn lobbed bombs from doors, and he also gains the abilities to slow time that the silent servants have, which really got annoying very fast. He also has a new phase of the fight where he'll periodically decide to hop up on the railing and rain an Iron Man repulsor blast from heaven, as well as spawn bull doors on the ground, all of which we have to dodge. He also, for some reason, gains the power to just slap and send a shockwave out. Now, one could argue that this boss isn't too hard, but for some reason I died to this guy so many times I started to get mad. I didn't even know why, I just kept getting the respawn treatment. No! I got body blocked! It didn't even matter. After around 20 minutes of trying and failing to finish this guy, I finally ended up clutching up. This initiated the final cutscene of the game where he asked for forgiveness and promptly died. Once again, we have a funeral where Stedhone says this is the end of a lineage. They'll be remembered as someone who tried to surpass their predecessors and advance door technology to the best it could be. No matter the cost, they tried to evade death in a world nigh impossible to maintain balance in. We pay our respects before sending the final Lord's soul into the ether. This, in turn, fully destroys Death's door, leaving it up to Death to reap souls once again. You might ask what happened to the crows, and well, they're spending their days relaxing at the camp. After the credits start to roll, I can finally rest because this game is officially what's that? No. Really? Okay. Surprise! There is a true ending. Okay, so in order to get the true ending, there's so much we have to do. Firstly, we need to head over to the Final Lord's Arena at the Commission to find a key. You guys remember that old tower I told you to tuck away? It's time to put that to use. By unlocking the tower, we can climb to the top and smack a bell, making it nighttime for the first time in the game. Now that it's nighttime, we can officially start looking for 7 tablets that are necessary for the true ending. The first I grabbed was in the cemetery, where I had to find 7 ghosts around the map and lead them into statues modeled after the Lords of Doors. I won't bore you with the process, but because I was stubborn and I didn't want to look stuff up here, it took me around half an hour to find all these guys. After grabbing the last one, the door that looks eerily similar to those from Titan Souls that I told you to remember from earlier is finally openable, which leads us to the first of 7 tablets. Its description reads that its eyes gazing into our soul. Creepy. I also ended up finding the final weapon of the game, the umbrella, but that thing's worthless, so I'll just stick with my greatsword. In my search for tablets, I ended up hearing an owl in the witch's estate, which I tried and actually succeeded in following. After finding the owl, it dropped me a fragment of a tablet, which meant I would have to go find 2 more owls to finish this one off. Next, I went to the overgrown ruins where I heard another owl. This one was the hardest for me to find by far, but in the end all it took was me following a noise, so I can't really say it was that bad. Now it was time to go grab the final piece of tablet number 2, which was located in the old watchtowers. Unfortunately for me, the owl was at the end of an ice parkour section, but I got to him pretty easily. Now that I had all 3, they fused to create the full second tablet. It was now that I accidentally found the final silent servant boss fight, which was the servant of the bow. This one's objectively the hardest as it's a fusion of all previous silent servants. Luckily for me, by this point I had seen it all, so I dispatched it first try. Upgrading my bow finally allowed me to shoot charge shots when a shot is held. Also, I forgot to mention it before, but after turning it nighttime, every single area has changed significantly in terms of enemy spawns, so despite having to go back to old areas, they still somewhat felt fresh to me due to all the changes. So at this point, I went to the witch's estate again and found Pothead sitting around telling me to go find the rest of the seeds and pots that I haven't already planted. Immediately, I understood this was for a tablet. I can't even lie to you all. Even with the guide, this took me several hours because despite me finding and planting most seeds, I still had to backtrack damn near everywhere to find the couple I missed. Mind you, out of 50 pots in the game, I only needed to plant 6. Luckily, eventually I found out that I could use my trowel to figure out if seeds were nearby, as it would glow if a seed was in the area. Thus began my arduous journey of searching for seeds in pots. During my search, I went to the flooded fortress and accidentally stumbled across a moon altar, of which I couldn't do anything with. This would bring me to the stranded sailor again, where I went into the store to have a meal before finding out that Jefferson wasn't a man at all, but an octopus, or squid. I don't know, it's kind of hard to tell. Regardless, he tells us that if we could keep his secret, he'll show us a secret in the flooded fortress. Unfortunately, in order to see the secret, I had to carry him the entire way on foot as he can't go through crow doors. Yay! After riding the gondola into the ruins, I saw that the water level had dropped, and after investigating, I found the real final avarice fight of the game. I locked in so hard that I couldn't possibly lose, and after fighting through the 4 hardest waves of enemies in the game, I was awarded with a hologram that looked suspiciously similar to Truth, as well well as our third tablet. After that experience, I finally ventured back to the moon altar in the flooded fortress alongside our sea-dwelling friend. He prays to the sea spirits, and a very big Jefferson decides to pop in and tells us that the tendrils of truth will guide us before giving us our fourth tablet. This was also where I found the second to last pot that I needed too, so it was officially time to go back to Pothead and find the location of the final pot. The final pot happened to be where I fought the Fire Silent Servant, silly me for forgetting to plant there. But now it's time to go finish this damn planting quest and grab the fifth tablet. After talking to Pothead again, he tells us Mother Nature is very happy with us, so I go to check a door in the back of the area, which is finally open and allows me to grab the fifth tablet. After searching for a while, I finally remembered that there was a truth door at the old watchtowers. I figured out that I needed to light 6 fires to open the door. This was a big pain, but here's a little montage of where each fire was in case you were curious. After finally opening the door, we got the 6th tablet, which meant there was only one more I needed to get the true ending. After trying to run back to the door at the end of the watchtowers, I noticed a path that I hadn't seen before. After heading up, I found a door that the moon opened for me, which led me to finding where Stedhone had buried their best friend. Here I found a mysterious locket, and upon opening it, we can see Stedhone alongside their dog. Truly, we don't deserve them. In its description, it says that the owner must want it back, so obviously I go to meet Stedhone, but instead of finding them sleeping, I find an open door leading into a mausoleum. A cutscene begins where Stedhone tells us that they felt something calling out to them. Upon showing them the locket, they say that it reminds them of the day the ground shook and the sky turned black. They start crying before commenting that they feel strange. It seems like it's finally time to put the Gravedigger to rest. This is the actual final boss of the game. Funnily enough, the Gravedigger is kind of like a necromancer and summons enemies out of the ground to rush us. They also slam into the ground, spawning shockwaves around the arena that we have to dodge. In the weirdest way, I don't feel like this fight was supposed to be hard, but that it was more so to make me feel something. The entire time I just felt bad for the Gravedigger, especially when we traded blows for the final hit and I finally put them down. With no one to give them a service, they say thank you before getting Thanos snapped into oblivion and leaving behind the final tablet. After entering the Crow Village to upgrade myself, I remembered the stone that told them everything about the game's events before they happened. After walking up, the tablets were placed into the stones surrounding a newly opened door for us to enter. Upon entering a mostly empty room, a white light appeared splitting into the one and only eye the devs love, Truth. We stare into Truth where we are shown the door from Titan Souls. Truth tells us that a long time ago, the first door was opened by a human seeking higher powers. Their soul would be taken in the process. The human fused with Truth, giving them knowledge of all things across space and time. Despite their body returning to the world, their soul was kept in the ether. This process destroyed the first door, and the tower it rested on collapsed. Truth was released into the world, but tied to the ruins of the first door, hence why we could find Truth here. It was then that our Lord of Doors found the first door and reconstructed it, trapping Death and naming it Death's Door. Eventually, a Reaper came along, looking for the mortal that escaped into the first door centuries ago. This was the Grey Crow, and without all of the previous knowledge that we just heard, they were stuck searching in vain. When the rebellious crows left the commission and found Truth, it provided them information to end the stagnation that the world fell into. It was because of them that we were assigned our very first giant soul, officially starting our journey. It then tells us that we would find the tablets and find Truth, then telling us that we would carry Truth out of its prison, leaving us with this scene. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's fully assemble all the lore here in a timeline. Firstly, the events of Titan Souls happen, where a human craves power and defeats a multitude of titans, eventually defeating Truth. Upon finally beating Truth, their soul is lost to the ether and the first door is destroyed. Long into the past, Death meets the first Lord of Doors and creates a covenant between them, essentially agreeing that he'll allow them to live longer as long as they can balance the world correctly in terms of reaping souls. 4 generations of lords go by with few problems, but it's then that our current Lord of Doors finds the remnants of the first door and uses them to trap Death, promptly naming the door after him. Some years go by and eventually a crow's tasked with taking the human soul, but obviously they can't do that because the human soul is stuck in the ether, which forces them to remain in the area searching for a way to break the door. It's around now that the Lord of Doors forces all doors in the region closed, leaving all crows behind to die miserable deaths. Upon a few select crows finding the old logbooks that recounted the commission's sins, they eventually leave, starting the Camp of the Free Crows. Here, they inadvertently help Truth, changing some orders around the commission, which results in giving us our first order, leading to the events of the game. Upon our crow finally reaching Truth, we carry Truth out of its prison. At this point, the rest is up to speculation. I more so lean on the side of Truth controlling us as we fly away to do whatever it wants, but honestly, there's no right answer here. It's just as likely that we simply helped Truth escape or that we're assisting Truth of our own free will. So, to start off this review, I want to say that this game is like a fully completed Titan Souls. It's kind of hard to explain without playing the game, but I would almost say that Titan Souls was like a foundation that this game was created on. Combat here is very fun, with the magic and melee systems working well well in the Souls-like combat that they were going for. Also, here's proof that this is a Souls-like before y'all get angry with me. I will say that I didn't see too much of a point in using anything that wasn't the daggers or the greatsword, as they just did their extremes of speed or strength the best. The upgrade system was really good too, and I also liked the shrine system. I appreciated that the shrine system wasn't too overblown and that there were only 16 in total. Any more and it probably would have been too much. In terms of soundtrack, I enjoyed it. For the most part, it wasn't really anything to write home about, but there were a couple of standout tracks for sure. The game was overall a really good length, and I actually think as opposed to Titan Souls, this is 100% worth it at full price. Not that it doesn't go on sale a ton though. I'll also say that I just love the premise of playing as a Crow Grim Reaper. Crows have always been associated with death. I mean, a group of them is literally called a murder, but even so, I think this idea was a golden one for sure. In terms of post-game, I didn't really love collecting all 50 seeds in pots. That sucked a lot, but I can also see why the devs made me do that, as even early in the game, I just felt like I was gonna have to do it all anyway. I do like that instead of the generic NG plus with no changes, that they went with the nighttime system for the true ending. It actually gave me a reason to keep going, as opposed to, okay, now play the exact same game again, but overpowered this time. Also, it's nice to see that this is an official sequel to Titan Souls. I also have to give props to the commenter who commented about this game as a recommendation on my Titan Souls video. If y'all have any recommendations, please feel free to let me know. I'm always looking for new video ideas and I appreciate it a ton. For a score, I would give this an honorary even 8.5. I like the art, and as I said before, the combat and length of the game are really good. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and I enjoyed almost every minute of it. Go check this out if you have the time. It's absolutely worth it even after watching this video. Also, honorary 8.5 is because 5 is an honorary even number. And that marks the end of Death's Door. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, a comment about any future games you'd like to see covered on the channel, and subscribe. Only 1% of the people who view our videos are subscribed, and if you made it this far into the video, you might as well stick around for the next one. And hey, if you end up changing your mind, you can always unsubscribe. But anyways, thank you for watching this far, and until next time, have a nice journey.